How to Train Your Murs. Written by JUBE514 and SalParadiseLost. Read to you by Evie is Evil. Chapter 7. This chapter is written by SalParadiseLost. Trigger warnings for this chapter include attempts of breeding and rape, kind of intended rape, depending on how you view it. Either way, look out for those trigger warnings. This is a mature fic. Some of these topics will continue for a couple more chapters. Just letting you guys know. Did Luther really have to choose the meanest bitch of a mermaid that I've ever met in my life? Diana growled as she entered the beach area, where Clark was giving Dick his requisite snacks. Luther, indeed, had cut Dick's meals in half, which meant the boy was constantly hungry and pawing at Clark for food in every moment he got. Luckily, though, Arthur was just as pissed about this as Clark, and had taken to buying food for the Mer with his own paycheck, so the extra snacks weren't being shown on the aquarium's balance sheet. Every morning, Arthur gave Clark a small lunchbox of additional food for Dick, which Clark had then snuck to Dick throughout the day. The Mer appreciated the snacks, but was obviously distressed and confused about why his food portion was being cut back so much. Every single time he was given his halved meal, he would stare up at Clark and give him questioning little coos, like he was asking where the rest was. Conversely, it meant he was absolutely desperate when his snack time came around. Dick screeched when Clark stopped his snack distribution, slapping his tail against the sand. The sound made a sleeping Bruce crack open an eye from his heated rock, before he grumbled and shifted to put his back to his dramatic pup. Tim was being pouched at the moment, and Jason was sitting next to Dick, begging for some of Dick's snacks and attacking Clark's shoes when he didn't get any. "I'm guessing trying to connect with our newest resident isn't going well?" Clark asked with a laugh. Dick, upon seeing Clark's attention going away from him and away from his snacks, howled in that haunting, spine-chilling way that only Murs could do. Clark had heard that sound from Bruce, when he was pissed and a baby wasn't given to him, and it was strange to hear a similar sound from Dick. Similar, but definitely not as menacing. He was getting older and sounding scarier, but Clark could still hear the teenage petulance in him. When Bruce was howling, he was disturbing. He was ghost stories and drowned ships. He was the thing in the distance that drove you mad and eventually to your death. He was all the things that humans had warned about for centuries, before they tamed the seas and netted the Murs out of the ocean. It was hard to imagine Bruce like that now, especially when he was being a big, dark lump on his rock. When he was relaxed, it was easy to think he was tamed, but Clark knew he could switch in a second if anyone dared harm one of his babies. "Don't be dramatic," Clark admonished, lightly bopping Dick's nose. The Mer went cross-eyed to follow his finger, and whined plaintively. "You'll get your food, I promise." Dick warbled, begging through his huge blue eyes, and Jason copied the sound also, giving Clark sparkly puppy dog eyes. "Not going well is the understatement of the century," Diana grumped, walking towards Clark and the pups and plopping herself down in the sand. "She tries to bite me with every chance she gets, and she literally destroyed the water filter. Hal is going to be forced to buy a more discreet system." She laid on her back and waited until a curious Jason scooted his way over to her. His striped tail waggled in excitement behind him as he adamantly crawled towards the other trainer. He had always taken a shine to Diana, even though their interactions were often limited. Jason was still being pouched, and Diana had an aquarium to run. But in the time that they did get to meet, Jason was always eager to nestle close and make happy baby sounds in response to her voice. Sometimes, when they really got going, it sounded like they were truly understanding each other. Jason peeped when he got close, making the sounds whiny, until Diana pulled him up onto her chest. When he was settled, he immediately switched to more relaxed purrs. "You'd never do that to me, would you, Jay?" She cooed at Jason, as the pup shoved his head into her hands with a soft murmur. "You'll always be my sweet tiny baby," Jason chirped, almost like he was agreeing with her. Clark rolled his eyes, ignoring Dick's tugs on his pants. "I can tell you from experience that they don't stay sweet or tiny." As if on cue, Dick screeched for food and pawed at Clark's legs, almost pulling down his pants altogether. Bruce grunted from his old man-heated rock, and Clark laughed. "See, even Bruce agrees with me. Right, Bruce?" The Mer remained silent, his back turned on all of them. Clark knew he wasn't sleeping, just ignoring them. "Bruce agrees with me," Clark said, not looking down, even though Dick was now attempting to climb him. "Not Jason," Diana disagreed, and Jason murmured at the sound of his name. "Jason's going to stay nice and small for me, aren't you?" Diana nodded, and Jason watched the movement, before copying it and also nodding. "Good little pup," she cheered, and lifted a hand towards Clark. "He deserves a snack, Clark. Give me a snack to give him. Your boss is ordering you to do it." Clark sighed, trudging through the Mer spaghetti that was Dick coiling around his legs, and placed some fruit snacks in her hand. She gave snacks to Jason, and Dick shrieked in lament as 3 of his fruit snacks were sacrificed to his younger brother. He flopped onto the beach, completely boneless, and murmuring sad puppy noises, until Clark rolled his eyes and gave him a pouch of tuna fish to tear into. Diana watched as the bowl of noodles did battle with the plastic pouch. "Luther wants to have Bruce and Talia's first meeting be tomorrow. We agreed on Bruce only. I didn't want to risk the pups being hurt." Clark's mouth went into a tight line. "I'm guessing he wants you to try and mate them together?" "Yes," she said, grimacing. "He doesn't like the optics of Bruce being a single dad, especially when he has his baby killer reputation. Doesn't matter that he's raising the pups just fine on his own, and that the killed baby is right here." She tapped Jason's shoulder, making the pup trill, before settling back down. "Mer females are more popular than males anyways," she added, still unhappy. "The Little Mermaid and all that." Clark scoffed. "It's crazy that the females are still thought of as being nice and gentle, when science has proven time and time again that they're more aggressive." "And murderous," Diana said. "After all, it's the females that have the most reports of sinking ships and luring sailors away from safety to eat them alive." She pet down Jason's spine, carefully avoiding the sharp edges of his spine, but still drawing a purr of contentment from his chest. "Bruce is big. I think he can handle himself if she tries anything, but God, I have a bad feeling about this. Why are we doing this? Bruce has 3 pups, 2 of which are still entirely dependent on him. He doesn't need more." "It's irresponsible. Hell, it's irresponsible of us to introduce them and risk both Bruce's and Tim's safety. We shouldn't be doing this." She made a growl of frustration, and almost began yelling, before Jason murmured, and she settled so he could fall back to sleep. They were quiet as Dick ate and Jason slept. Finally, Clark broke the silence. "What time are you going to introduce them?" 7 a.m., before the guests come at 9, Diana said, staring up at the ceiling. "Will you make sure Dick and Jason are separated into one of the nursery tanks tonight? We need to make sure Tim is being pouched in the morning." Clark sighed and nodded. "Yeah, I can do that." Bruce would not be happy about this. Bruce was not happy the next morning. In order for the Mers to remain truly separated, they had to lock a confused Dick and Jason into one of Dick's old nursery tanks. Although that tank had been fine for a younger Dick, he was much larger now, and it was a cramped space for both of them. They hadn't fought the displacement, though, trusting their caretakers and mostly just giving confused chirps when put into a tank that was much too small for them. It was only one night, though, and eventually Dick and Jason settled in together. Dick coiled around his younger brother, wrapping him up tight, and they went to sleep intertwined together. They were a peaceful picture, two brothers nestled up against each other and snoozing. Bruce, on the other hand, was being a menace. "Really, buddy? Again?" Clark sighed as he walked in and found Bruce, out of the main exhibit, and trying to jimmy open one of the doors that would lead him out towards the nursery tanks. It was currently 6:36 a.m. Clark had gotten there at 6. Bruce had already tried 3 breakouts in the time that Clark had been here. Hal had said he'd been doing it all night, and was more than happy to pass the baton over to Clark. The trainer walked over to Bruce, crouching down next to him and watching him struggle with the lock. "Can we go back to the tank? I promise you can have your babies back in like 2 hours. Bruce didn't even look at him. He just huffed and kept sticking his claws into the lock. "They are fine," Clark assured him, and Bruce's eyes flicked towards him for a second. "I promise. All they're doing is sleeping. Nothing bad is happening to them. They are just sleeping." Bruce made a gravelly sound in the back of his throat and fully looked at Clark. His eyes searched Clark's, and his jaw was tense with his anxiety at not seeing his children. But eventually, he slumped against the door, murmuring a low note. And they wondered where Dick got his dramatics from. "Can we go back now? The faster we get this over with, the quicker we can return your children back to you." Bruce was silent, and then he heavily sighed before hauling himself away from the door and going back towards his tank. "Whoa," Hal whispered, watching as the Mer went towards his exhibit. "How did you get him to listen so easily?" Clark shrugged. "It helps to talk to them. They are pretty intelligent, you know, and can pick up on things like tone and some signals on what you want them to do. Asking nicely with a soft tone just motivates them a bit." There was a quiet splash as Bruce dipped back under the water, and Hal hummed, watching the Mer's disappearing black fins. "How are things going with the introduction?" Clark asked, walking towards the small area where Talia had been moved into. Hal followed, though still kept looking back towards Bruce. He was quiet, like he hadn't heard Clark's question. "Hal?" he questioned again, and the man beside him startled his attention back onto Clark. Clark raised a silent eyebrow in question. "Right, yeah," Hal mumbled, shaking himself a bit before fully diverting his attention back to the holding tank in front of him. "Things have been going well, I guess. You were here for Talia's delivery. You know how calm she is around people," Hal said sarcastically as they both climbed the stairs to a platform above the water. The holding tank was a small area that was connected to the main exhibit, connected by a small panel in the shared wall, which could be lowered if needed. They mainly used it for introducing new creatures, like turtles and schools of fish into the Mer's exhibit, training. Sometimes Dick's attention span was a bit better than when he couldn't be distracted by Bruce, or for quarantining injured animals. Most of the time, though, they just left it open and let the Mers wander their way into it if they wished. The Mers liked it because it was far from the main viewing wall, and the heart of where the staff would bustle around, making it a prime location for the pups to hang on the edge and beg food from. Occasionally, you could even find all 3 of them napping in the shallower tank, basking in the sunlight while staying completely submerged and enjoying the warmer water. It had always been such a peaceful area for them, but it wasn't peaceful now. The wall between the areas was shut. The edge of the tank had warning signs placed around it to prevent anyone from approaching. A net had been placed over the top of the tank. It was all to prevent the mermaid from bursting out of the water and bringing a trainer down with her. It sent a shiver down Clark's spine. "Has the net been needed?" he asked Hal, and the other man's frown deepened. "Yes." Inside the tank, the mermaid must have spotted them, because she rose to the surface, and her shark-like fins cut through the water like a dangerous sail. It was an obvious warning as any. These were dangerous waters. "Frick," he said, though he wanted to say a much harsher word. You mean fuck, Hal supplied with a scoff. You'd think that for a mer that's been in captivity nearly her whole life, she'd be a little kinder to handling. She's been in captivity her whole life? You know where she actually came from? Hal shrugged. Yeah, Luther was bragging about it all this morning. Apparently, they caught her in the Persian Gulf when she was a pup. Sharks are always valuable, and her Piscean subspecies, a leopard shark, gives her all those pretty markings, which means she was a gold mine. When the fishermen realized what they had on their hands, she was immediately sold to the League Aquarium, and they put her into their breeding program. Obviously, they haven't had any success with breeding, but when they heard that we were able to get 2 pups to survive... Hal's face twisted, and Clark knew that exact same slimy feeling. He had felt it, too, over these last months. Apparently, the head over at the League was more than willing to strike a deal with Luther to get her over here. Clark grimaced as he watched the mermaid's brown, striped body thrash a huge amount of water onto the bordering floor. She didn't look up above the water, but Clark didn't doubt she was snarling. Clark couldn't imagine what her life had been like. Taken from her home as a pup and immediately sold into an aquarium's breeding program for failed attempt after failed attempt. He didn't blame her for being distrustful of humans and being transported to a new place. Bruce, who was on the other side of the opening, was almost a complete opposite. While Talia was angrily splashing water and circling through the small area, Bruce was curiously floating towards the closed-up opening. Clark couldn't make out the details of the mer from above the water and at this angle, but he could see the mer's body language. He was a little wary, but still confidently filling his space. Occasionally, he would lift his head above the surface and check to make sure Clark was still there. Then, he would dip back down under the water and edge a little bit closer to the opening. He still kept a healthy distance away, but didn't look nearly as stressed as Talia did. Is Diana already in the viewing room with Luther? Clark asked as Hal began checking over the automatic controls to the door. Yep, Hal said distractedly. You better head down there if you want to watch from the glass. I'm going to be opening these in a couple of minutes. Clark sighed, and then descended into the mirror's main viewing area. He found Diana standby tensing next to Luther and his bevy of suited goons. She was holding a clipboard and watching Bruce idly drift through the water. The mirror's eyes kept flipping to her, obviously surprised to see her on that side of the glass, and not up in the surface/beach area, where she usually was. When he saw Clark join her, another trainer that always stayed in the above area, his body language immediately changed, and he took on a much more defensive swimming pattern. They had used the door to introduce new animals into the tank before, but they had never gathered in a crowd along the glass to stare at him as they did. Kent, Luther said, instead of a greeting, as he came to stand next to Diana. I trust that our mer is ready. Clark narrowly bit back what he wanted to say. No, he wasn't ready. He was young, technically an adult, but only in the same way that 20-somethings were considered adults. He was stressing because he didn't have his babies. He most likely had never met a female mer in his adult life. He was obviously picking up on the change in routine, and his dorsal fins were flaring out in response. The yellow stripe that lined those long, flowing fins flashed like a warning flag. Clark wished he could rush up there, that he could get Bruce out of the water and to his children and away from the roaring mermaid that was about to enter his safe space. This was supposed to be his home, and they were coming in here, stealing his kids and bringing in a stranger. There was a barely audible click, and the door between the aquariums began to lower. Clark tensed, and in response, Bruce tensed, his head swiveling between Clark and the door. He knew something was up, and Bruce had always hated surprises. Clark's breathing caught in his chest as he stared. He's pretty sure everyone held their breath. They were all looking at the door, waiting. There! A brown shark fin passed by the opening. cutting the water with its hard edge. A clear warning to whatever was on the other side. And Bruce got the warning. His dorsal fins completely flared out to their full length, making Bruce look monstrously big and intimidating. Clark couldn't hear whatever sound was coming out of Bruce at the moment, but he was sure it was a growl. The shark fin paused, and then slowly changed direction. The seconds seemed to stretch for minutes, before Talia finally peered out of the opening, tilting her head curiously and vocalizing back to Bruce. She really was a beautiful mer. Her long, dark brown hair clouded around her face and framed her keen, green eyes. Her long cranial fins flicked in interest towards Bruce, and the silver ID tag that had been pierced into one of them gleamed in the tank's lights. Behind her, her long shark tail. She stayed still at a safe distance away, watching a similarly frozen Bruce. Then slowly, she swam a little closer. Bruce snarled, flashing his side. He bared his teeth and flashed his claws. He was showing all his warning signs. It said, "Get away." It said, "Don't come closer." Talia didn't seem to be listening. Luther laughed, and there was an evil sort of joy in the sound. My, he mused, watching as Bruce darted away from an incoming Talia, and as the mermaid followed him. He kept trying to swim away, but they were in an enclosed space, and they had blocked his access to the beach area. He was agitated, obviously, and kept trying to figure out a way out of the water. And as he tried to evade, Talia followed, almost like she was stalking him, much more interested in him than he was of her. Talia wasn't being aggressive exactly, but she was definitely investigating him and ignoring his body language to do it. It wasn't the worst that could be happening, and honestly, not entirely unexpected from a mermaid that had probably only been put in with male mers for one thing. "It looks like we're definitely going to have more pups scampering around real soon." Luther grinned. Talia plowed forward. Bruce froze as the mermaid closed in, her hands wrapping around his fluke and pulling them together. Clark could see the mer's face pale, a violated horror passing through him as she pressed their tails together. Oh God, they were going to do it. Disgust ripped through Clark as he watched Bruce's body lock up. They had done this. They had let this happen. Bruce squirmed, suddenly struggling, but the mermaid, obviously more experienced, and just doing the same thing she always did, pinned him down. Clark shouldn't feel like this. These were just animals. They weren't people. They didn't feel like people. It wasn't the same. So why did it feel like that? Especially when Bruce caught his eyes and looked like he was silently begging. And then she stopped. They were chest to chest, tails together, seemingly seconds away from mating. Bruce was still, looking somewhere between a panic attack and lashing out, as the mermaid tilted her head. Her eyebrows crinkled together, and she vocalized to Bruce. It took Bruce a couple of seconds, but he vocalized back. It was impossible to tell the expression on Talia's face, despite her human-like features. Her eyes were narrowed, and her lips pursed. She stared at Bruce for a couple of seconds, her breathing slow and measured, while Bruce's still seemed close to hyperventilating. But then, she let him go. She swam away, back towards the holding tank. She slowly came to the window, pausing at its edge just to look over her shoulder at Bruce. She vocalized again, but Bruce didn't respond this time. He just stayed far away, still trembling a bit. She waited for an answer, and when it didn't come, she turned away and silently passed through the opening into the holding tank. "What was that?" Diana whispered, and Clark jolted. He had forgotten she was there. Her face reflected the horror that was rolling around in his own stomach. "It was a failure, is what it was," Luther growled, and his gaggle of suited goons flinched back from him, clutching their clipboards and phones slightly closer. "Get Roz on the phone," he snapped to the nearest assistant, catching the poor girl in a searing gaze. "I need to talk to him about the terms of our deal." She nodded and began rapidly pulling up this Roz's person's contact information. Before she could fully bring it up, Luther snatched the phone out of her hands, muttering about how useless she was. "You two," he growled to Clark and Diana as he scrolled. "Get back to your jobs. I don't pay you to stand and stare. We have aquarium guests that are coming in less than 2 hours." They didn't need to be told twice. Clark and Diana both practically sprinted up the stairs, running towards the MERS area. They worked together to take away the barriers that blocked Bruce off from the beach, and put up the barrier between the tanks. "Go signal for Bruce to come up on the beach," Diana directed. "I'm going to go grab one of the transport carts and get the pups. Bringing them back together will help calm Bruce down." Clark nodded and climbed over the small barrier to get into the beach area. He practically sprinted over the sand and waded into the water, purposefully splashing to let Bruce know that he was here. "Come on, buddy," he whispered, searching the water for the MERS dark shadow. "Come here." It took a bit, definitely longer than it usually did, but eventually, Bruce's head peered over the water. His hair was wet and flat against his head, and his ear fins were pressed down. His eyes were blank. Clark had never seen him look so lost. "Come here, Bruce," Clark called to him, and Bruce's gaze slowly met him. He cooed, and the sound was painfully young. Clark sat down, making himself look smaller, and waited as Bruce approached. The mer could look so much larger when he wanted to, but right now, he seemed so small. He approached cautiously, much more cautiously than he usually did, and as he got closer, Clark could see he was still trembling. "I'm right here, buddy," Clark whispered when Bruce finally came within arm's reach. "She's not coming back. You're safe." Slowly, and so delicately, he shifted so he could sit next to Clark. He settled into the sand, his tail out in front of him, and then leaned into Clark's side. Clark could feel his sigh, his 2 quick breaths, his slight trembling, and it made the guilt in Clark triple in size. Bruce murmured a low note, staring out over the water, and Clark could have sworn he almost heard his own name in it. "I'm sorry," Clark mumbled, trying to fight back the sudden urge to cry. "I'm so sorry that happened." The mer warbled softly and leaned his full weight into Clark. Clark sighed and pressed back against the mer, their bodies holding each other up. The mer's head leaned into him, finding the crook in his neck, and Clark couldn't help but press his cheek to the top of Bruce's head. Clark could feel Bruce's breaths evening out, and the shaking finally leaving his body. He brought an arm up to press Bruce even closer, and the mer melted even more. He cooed, and Clark hummed, neither of them willing to break the small bit of peace, the both of them just taking comfort in the closeness. They sat there quietly, until Diana came back with a cart full of chirping, squirming mer puppies. And that is the end of Chapter 7. Author's notes. It occurred to me that Bruce's pouch is essentially the mer equivalent of the bat cape, able to hide a robin no matter the size. Also, yes, the chapter count did go up. I'm bad at trying to guess chapter count, but damn it, I try anyways. Reader's notes. It's hard to stay happy after the end of that one. I'm feeling a bit more morose now. I feel bad for Bruce. That was not cool what they did to him. It's gonna get worse. Oh. Happier note. I like the little parallel in that, like, Jason's favorite is Diana, like how Jason in canon is like fan of Wonder Woman, and like Dick likes Clark, and that's the same here. That's kind of cool. Yeah, I don't have much more to say. That was a sad chapter. Um, yeah, I'll see you guys again for the next one. All right, thanks for listening. Bye.